So in March of this year, I left my corporate job in banking and I moved from Malaysia to Australia to pursue my dreams of content creation and entrepreneurship. Before I got to that turning point though, and when I was still working my 9 to 5, I realized that I was already well on my path to living my worst nightmare. And that if I didn't change anything, I was going to live a life that I will regret. And truly, nothing scared me more than that. So I packed up my life into 30 kilos of baggage, said goodbye to family and friends, and I hopped on a one-way flight to a new beginning. Here's what happened and why I did it. All my life, I was sold this golden narrative of what a successful and good life looks like, as I'm sure we all were. And it's basically, getting good grades in school and then graduating from a good uni and then afterwards working at a good company that's gonna pay you well. And the promise is that you'll be able to live a very comfortable life where, you can afford your own home and car one day and go for expensive brunch every weekend and go for nice holidays. And essentially the promise is that your life is gonna fall into place as long as you successfully follow this blueprint. So that was the path that I set myself on. I got the grades in school, I did my bachelor's and master's in the UK, and I worked there for a year. And then after I graduated, I accepted a project management role in banking back home. And from 2020 until March of this year, that was exactly what I did until I just couldn't anymore. In those 3 years of working, I went through the worst burnout that I had ever experienced in my life. And basically, I was working very long hours. And towards the end of the project cycle, I'd be working like maybe until 10 or 11 p.m. every night for like a couple months. I would work weekends too when projects were going live. And the crazy part was I would also see other colleagues online during those crazy hours. And that was just considered normal. That on top of just the general corporate grind and, office politics and covering your own ass all the time, all of it just got so exhausting for me. And let me tell you, towards the end of it, I was just barely keeping myself together, just enough for me to be able to just about do my job. But every day and every task just felt so painful to me. Like even something as small as writing an email took me like an hour to do. I was getting sick on a monthly basis, and at one point I even missed a meeting that I had set up and was supposed to chair because I was just so out of it. And that's the thing, like I'm not the kind of person that does this. And so that was the point where I realized, shit, this has gotten out of control. And in hindsight, as horrible as that was, I am grateful that things turned out the way they did because it forced me to reflect on my life and my choices up till that point. And yeah, it was like the wake-up call that I needed to really turn things around. So in this video, I wanted to share all the reasons that I quit and all the realizations and the lessons that I learned along the way, which ultimately led me to this decision to move to Australia on a work and holiday visa so that I can ultimately give myself the space and the opportunity to pursue content creation full-time and to also one day create my own business. If you're currently in the corporate grind and are at a crossroads in your life, then maybe you can relate to some of these. Change happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. This is a quote by Tony Robbins that I think perfectly encapsulates my experience. I was in a lot of pain when I was on the conventional path, but at the same time, I had this crippling fear of the unknown. What if I pursued my own thing or my own business and it just failed? Or what if I make the wrong decision and then ruin my life? So in a lot of ways, I'm really grateful that things were as rough as they were because I don't think I would have been brave enough to make the leap if things weren't that way. To be fair, I think a lot of people are teetering on that edge. And I believe that this is probably the most insidious part about corporate. Corporate is hard and it's soul crushing, but the stability and the comfort that it offers you is often just marginally higher than the discomfort enough to make you stay. A lot of people will say things like, I hate my job, it's horrible, but I'm probably going to get a promotion next year, so things don't seem too bad. Or my life isn't so great, but it feels comfortable, and why would I want to change that? And this is essentially the trap that people fall into. What ultimately helped me to make that leap in the end, though, was realizing that all of it is hard. It's all hard, but you get to choose your hard. Like on one hand, yes, I knew it was going to be really hard starting over, trying to pursue content, trying to create my own business and paving my own way and pursuing financial freedom. But it's also hard staying in a job that pays me just enough for me to feel comfortable, but to not ever be content with my life. Playing office politics to get ahead and being at the mercy of really horrible bosses and management, being shackled by the golden handcuffs and sacrificing most of my time, my health, and my energy for something that I don't care about at all. The second realization I made is that time is our most precious resource and that we shouldn't wait to live our lives. There's one story that my sister told me that really haunts me a lot. And basically, there was this guy at her company who was of retirement age, so he was like 60 something, and he had saved up all this money from decades and decades of working, and the plan was to ultimately retire in Spain. And apparently, the day after his very last day of work, he had stepped out of his apartment to go grocery shopping or whatever, and he just collapsed right then and there and died right in front of his doorstep. And the moral of the story here is that you just can't wait to live your life. You can't delay it for retirement or for another day because your life is happening right now, whether you like it or not. And for me, I realized I was spending 5 days a week, sometimes 6, doing things that really wasn't bringing value into the world or to anyone else, and that wasn't making me happy or fulfilled in any way. And the thought that I was wasting my life away like this was so viscerally painful to me. There's this quote from the book Tuesdays with Morrie, and basically Morrie says, "Once you learn how to die, you learn how to live." And the idea here is that we should think about death often, because then we'll realize how little time we have and how precious every minute is. I find it funny how all of us, myself included, are so in denial of death until eventually it reaches our doorstep one day. When you think about it, if let's say you found out that you were going to die in the next year or the next few years, how many of us would still be living the lives that we're living now? How many of us would choose to spend our days the way that we do? And you realize very quickly how most of the things that are so important to you right in this very moment, turns out none of them are actually that important at all. I didn't want me to reach that point where I got a lot older and got closer to death's door for me to finally take action with my life. The third realization is that health should never be sacrificed for anything. Your health is number one, and literally without it, nothing else matters. When I was still working my 9 to 5, I was sprouting white hairs like there was no tomorrow, and I'm only 27, and within the last 6 months of working, I got sick on a monthly basis. I also wasn't sleeping well for a really long time because of the constant low-grade anxiety that I was feeling. And of course, we all know about the long-term effects of being stressed. As someone who really prioritizes her health, this bothered me so much to think that the thing that I was doing for most of my week and most of my life was ruining my health. I want to live a life that is good for my nervous system and good for my body and won't make me sick in the long term. The next reason why I quit was because I felt like I was living someone else's life. When we don't take the time to properly reflect on what's important to us and what our values are, we often look at other people and see what their values are and what's important to them as a reference for how to live our lives. I thought that the prestige of having a fancy job title and being in a swanky glass tower and all the external recognition that comes with that was going to be the best thing ever. That at that point I would have made it in life. But honestly, all that shiny stuff got old for me real quick, and the reality sets in where, you're working crazy hours and sometimes weekends, and you lose the will to do things in your life, and you're just on this perpetual hamster wheel chasing material things that ultimately don't matter. I didn't want my values in life to be determined by society and our culture of prioritizing things like money and status and looking good in front of others. But honestly, part of me wanted those things for so long because I thought that was what other people wanted, and that if other people wanted it, then it was probably the right things to want. It took a really long time, but I finally realized that I just don't give a shit about all of these things, and that a life that feels good is infinitely better than a life that looks good. The next reason is I wanted to design a life that I didn't feel the need to escape from. When I was working my 9 to 5, I was essentially a zombie on autopilot. We're so worn down by the grind that we look for distractions to take the pain away, like entertainment and material goods and going for nice holidays. I essentially want to design a life that I don't want a holiday from because I just love my life that much. A life that I don't want distractions from, and what I'm doing every day is basically the things that I would be doing if I didn't have to do anything at all. In the 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, he talks about how the goal is not to not ever work again, but to find work that you don't want to stop doing. And ever since I read that, it just blew my mind, and that's something that I want to find for myself. Ultimately, at the end of the day, people want purpose, and we want to feel useful to others. This basically accounts for most of our happiness and life satisfaction, and there's a whole bunch of research which backs this up too. I think a lot of people are just mildly content with their lives. They'll say things like, yeah, my job isn't so great, but it's not so bad either. Or things like, I wish I wasn't living here and that I could be living somewhere else, but it's not too bad. But the thing is, for me, I didn't want to look back on my life and think, oh yeah, that wasn't too bad. I want to be able to look back on my life and think, damn, that was an amazing time. The last realization I had is that most people fall into this certainty bias or certainty trap. Humans always crave certainty, and we would much rather pick certain misery over uncertain outcomes because uncertainty is so deeply uncomfortable for us. A lot of us would rather pick a life that isn't so great, but gives us a certain degree of certainty. So in this example, it would be working the 9 to 5 and getting your steady paycheck and going up the ladder in a very predictable career trajectory. Then I realized that, me staying in a path that I was unhappy in just because I wanted that certainty was a pretty shitty reason for me to keep myself stuck in a life that I don't like. So in a nutshell, that's some of the main reasons why I decided to quit my job and, pursue a life on my own terms. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of other reasons and, complexities involved, but I didn't want to make this video into a documentary about my life, basically. So yeah, this is a new chapter of my life. I'll be in Melbourne for the next year, and I'll be mainly doing content and doing jobs here and there to sort of cover living expenses and things like that. I'll be documenting my whole journey of quitting my 9 to 5 and pursuing a life on my own terms on this channel. So if you want to follow along, then don't forget to subscribe. Okay guys, as always, take care and see you in the next video.